Pope Francis was on a roll, but he finally messed up, and it has to do with drugs. Now, he had a great run for quite a while, and pretty much any time he got national news coverage, or I should say international news coverage, it was because he was saying something incredibly reasonable, rational, and compassionate about a variety of topics when it comes to how we should treat homosexuals, global inequality, the plight of the poor. Pretty much one after another, he was just cranking out hits, and even atheists like me were in his corner. We were rooting for the Pope, but not this time. He was speaking at a drug enforcement conference in Rome, and he had this to say about legalization efforts. Even limited attempts to legalize recreational drugs are not only highly questionable from a legislative standpoint, but they fail to produce the desired effects. And he went on to say that providing addicts with drugs doesn't solve the problem and is rather a veiled means of surrendering to the phenomenon. Now, lest you believe that I might be sort of reading between the lines and going a little bit too far in condemning the Pope, he finally says, "Let me state this in the clearest terms possible. The problem of drug use is not solved with drugs." Which I guess is true as a sentence. Within its own internal logic, it is true. But the problem for the Pope there and for people who are working for legalization is that they don't think that drugs are inherently by themselves a problem. Is the solution to alcohol is not more alcohol, and yet for some reason alcohol is legal in most countries around the world. Pope doesn't seem to be doing much to oppose that. I assume he's not much of a drinker, except perhaps a little bit of the old red wine. Now, the reason that I find this to be sort of depressing is it seemed like this Pope was less driven by the need to conform to the tradition of his religion and more capable than other popes we've had in the past few decades to look at the world, see the problems that we actually have, and then think about potential solutions and what effect they would actually have. And it doesn't have to fit in necessarily with a strict, compliance with his religious dogma. Like, it seemed like he cared more about the actual best outcomes for people. But in this case, it's the same as every, conservative politician we have in the U.S. It's just they've been brought up to think that drugs are bad for you, and they think thus that legalization is not the solution. Now, look, the actual way that the Pope would go about trying to treat people who have the drug problem that he's talking about would probably be pretty compassionate, probably a lot better than what we get here in America. And yet, he completely misses the whole point. This is one of the reasons that last week when Hillary Clinton said, we still don't have enough science to know whether or not marijuana should be legalized, that was depressing for the same reason. These are both smart people. I mean, I'm sure everybody watching this video would assume, right, that Hillary Clinton and definitely the Pope, smarter than me, and yet they think that just because they saw reefer madness when they were young, that drugs have to be a bad thing. Although again, as I always say, and have said in this video, alcohol remains legal, and you can certainly fuck up your life, your health, and end your life with alcohol much quicker than you can with marijuana. I mean, just look at drunk driving and things like that. Look at the effect on the body. Nobody's ever OD'd on marijuana. It's almost physically impossible. And the thing is, I understand that he is driven by compassion, at least to the extent that he looks at people who have drug problems and he doesn't want them to have those problems, which is great. But the thing is, that has nothing to do with legalization. If you are, at rock bottom and you want to just make your situation worse, or you think that this will make your situation better, but it's really going to do harm, you can do drugs. And it's illegal right now. And if it was illegal, people would still do that. People who were having bad situations might turn to drugs to feel better about it. But if they didn't have any drugs, if you could just snap your fingers and they're gone across the world, there are other things that they can and would use to harm themselves, to try to feel better, temporarily. Like, wanting to get high for a little while is not the worst thing in the world. And certainly, it's not as bad as taking people who want that temporary sort of escape from their problems and then locking them up or making it hard for them to either vote or get a job for the rest of their life, as we do routinely in the U.S. So I don't think that the Pope has the answer when it comes to those sorts of problems. Other countries have been experimenting with it. I mean, some countries like Portugal, it's decriminalized pretty much across the board. In a couple of states in the U.S., marijuana is now legal for recreational use. Look at the crime figures. Those figures are already there in those states in the U.S. Things have not gotten worse. In fact, they've gotten better. Now, I don't think that that'll necessarily hold out in the long term. I think it's probably just sort of random statistical noise. And by the way, what I love is that people who say they're driven by the Bible have as a benefit to their philosophy that they have an actual book that's telling them exactly what to do. I, as an atheist, don't have that. I have many books that I can learn from, but I don't have one that has the absolute truth. But what does the Bible actually say about drug use? Among other things, it says, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. Thus implying that we should make use of the plants that exist around the globe. Now, that doesn't mean that every plant is good for us. I don't think that we should be smoking poison ivy or anything like that. And yet it doesn't seem as if God was very clear that, you're not supposed to enjoy the fumes from the plants that I put out there for you to be the steward of, right? I'm an atheist. There's probably a lot about the Bible I don't know, but I don't think that the Bible is very clear when it comes to this sort of thing. I think the Bible and the people who followed it early on would care more about sort of the health and welfare of these people, and certainly we can try to help even drug addicts with things like psychiatric care, but I don't think that continued demonization and criminalization of their drug activities is the solution. It's sad that U.S. politicians continue to think that's the case, and it's even sadder that Pope Francis, who was the atheist's pope for a while there, doesn't get it when it comes to drugs.